You know, it's interesting as I prepare for these YouTube videos, the thought processes I go through because I reflect back over my life, and it gives me quite a little trip um, back through the years, through the decades. And this last one that I talked about in the last YouTube, where I was talking about planting the grain the way my dad had told me to, and he got me out of school especially to do it. Um, I felt so good having completed that it just, I can't even talk. I can't even express how good it made me feel, especially when he took me up after they'd all sprouted and we looked at it together and he put his arm around me. Anyway, it was just such a warm feeling of accomplishment and his approval I felt. And I can't help but think that that same sense of approval isn't what our Heavenly Father feels when He gives us some instructions and we do what He says to do. Let me give you an example from my life when that didn't happen. Now, we've been kind of peeling the onion back through the years, and I'm going back even further on this one because I got thinking, it's about, I had an older brother that was about 13 years older than I was. And he would have been still in high school or maybe just the first year out home in the spring of the year. I can't remember the exact situation, but I'm getting ahead of my story. We were all awakened in the spring of the year, early spring of the year, and the whole house came alive at about 3:30 in the morning one day. And so like I said, I was maybe 6 years old. I would have had to have been only about 6, maybe 7 at the most. But I can just remember the chaos in the house, and people were saying, the barn's on fire, the barn's on fire, and come and help, we need help. And of course, I couldn't help. They didn't expect me to help. I was just a little 6-year-old kid. It's interesting what you can remember, because I remember my older brother, who was old enough to help, they kept saying, come on, he said. And I remember him kept saying, I can't find my shoe, I can't find my shoes. And it was just a panicky situation. And I remember just being so nervous about everything. And I finally looked out the window as everybody else was running down the barn. They told me to stay in the house, I guess because they thought I'd get in trouble or get hurt or something if I went out. So I stayed in the house and did what they said. And when I looked out the window, that barn was just engulfed in flames. And in the middle of the night, they went down there and tried to put that fire out, and it was a futile exercise. That barn was built out of old logs. I can still remember a little about it. It had kind of wood floors, and the logs had cracks between them, and it was hard to keep warm in the winter. I remember the wind, when it blew, would blow dust in the cracks. And this sounds really gross, but we used to get cow manure and fill the cracks up with cow manure to try to, and then it would dry, and that's how we'd try to insulate the barn from the wind that would blow through there. Well, that's not pertinent to the burning situation or what I was going to say. But our whole family went through a trial because of that, you can imagine. Now, we didn't have quite as many cows back then. It was a little earlier. And I don't recall how many. I want to say maybe 8, 7 or 8 cows that was being milked at the time. I just felt the despair through the conversations that I overheard about what was the predicament that we were in as a family, because our livelihood came from those cows and the milk we would get from them. And now the barn was burnt down. Well, I won't go through all the details. We finally ended up building another barn. I won't go into that right now, but it took quite a while. It took that whole, it took, a barn doesn't get built overnight, and it took time and money and resources and help to build it. But in the meantime, those cows still had to be milked every night and every morning. And again, I was so small that I wasn't able to milk the cows. I just felt a little bit helpless. And the further we got into it, into the summer months, I remember in early spring, late spring, maybe, I guess it was, we finally somehow got those. I can remember we pulled a wire fence around and built a temporary corral where we could bring the cows out into, and we built some panels out of slabs and tried to get them to stand in by those panels while we milked them by hand. I don't know if you've ever seen a cow milked by hand or not, but you have to get them to stand still, and you pull the stool up, and if you're kind to them and they start to trust you, you can eventually maybe get them to eat a little hay or get them distracted. And some of them didn't seem to mind as much as others, but some of them were just horrendous to try to get to cooperate while you were milking them by hand, especially out in an open field like we had to do now that our barn had burnt down. So that's the setting. Now, let me advance maybe a couple of months. By then, the cows, some of them had learned to stand in the field better, and we were making progress. And rather than make it a whole family event to try to get them to settle down and hold still while we milked them, it got to where my dad sometimes had to do it by himself because other people were off doing other things. And I can remember this one time where he settled in and got the cows ready and got his stool and bucket and was milking them by hand. And my job was to, again, I couldn't really get too close because it seemed to scare the cows more than if I just kind of stand back. So I remember kind of standing back and just kind of being in the way so that they didn't feel like they could run off while my dad was milking them. And it seemed to help them remain stationary so that he could milk the cows. Well, turned out that one day I had something better in mind to do than that. Didn't seem like I was helping all that much anyway. And I'd convinced myself that I needed to go up to my friend's house and see him because I'd made arrangements to play up there, and I'd gone up a few other times, and it was a lot of fun. And anyway, I decided that I was going to go up to his house and play. He had some toys I liked, and he was about not quite a half mile through the field. If I cut a kitty corner, I could get to his house. And anyway, I asked my dad while he was milking those cows, I said, can I go up to, his name was Doyle, can I go up to Doyle's house and play? And he just kind of looked up at me, and his patience is kind of running thin anyway, you can imagine. And he looked at me and he said, well, of course not. I need you here. Can't you see I'm in trouble and I need your help? And yeah, I could kind of see that, but then I had my own needs. and I wanted to go play. Long story short, I wanted to go play. And so I asked him one more time. I think I even said, please, please. And I kind of pled my case, as I remember, can I go play up to Doyle's house? And again, I'm like a 6-year-old kid, and I couldn't see that he would need me that much. And again, he said, no, I've got to have you stand there and steady, just be there so those cows don't think they can just wander off while I'm milking them. And I sat and looked, and I couldn't see that I was doing any good at all. So as soon as my dad turned his head for a few minutes, boom, I was gone. I took off up the house. I can remember I ran just as hard as I could so I could get out of sight before he figured out I was gone. And I ran up to the house, and because you have to kind of go through the house and grab a coat or whatever on your way up to play. And I got about 3/4 of the way up to the house. And even though I was running really hard, something told me that I was in trouble. And I looked back over my shoulder, and there was my dad in full pursuit. I didn't think he could run that fast, but he caught me just as I was going through into the back door of the house. And I think it's the only time that I can remember him actually slapping me. But he grabbed his gloves out of his pocket. They were in his hind pocket, and he used them on my backside. I never held that against him at all, because I think I deserved it. But I can remember the feeling that I had after that. And it didn't go away very soon. But the feeling that I had after that, because he took me back down and I finished I guess you'd call it my shift. But he let me know that he thought I could do better than that, and that he'd never have to do that again. Break away from what he was doing to teach me to obey. And like I said, it seemed to go for weeks after that, 2 or 3 weeks. Whenever I thought about the incident, I just had this bad feeling come over me. Okay, so stop right there and just think how, what life lessons I'm being taught. When my dad trusted me later in life to plant the grain, I was there and I listened and I obeyed and accomplished and had good feelings, really warm feelings. But earlier in my life, I had disobeyed and had bad feelings. So I had some comparisons to make, and this is just one example. I could go on and name a lot of different examples of things that have happened that gave me good feelings, and times when I listened and obeyed, and other times when I didn't. And like I said, I think the only way I could describe it is the fruits of making a correct choice when you're asked to obey, when you have the choice to obey or not obey. The fruit of that is that you get a warm feeling. The fruit of not obeying is that you get a feeling that of disappointment, and it actually feels gloomy. It feels so unsettling, and there's no warmth there at all. It's just disappointment in yourself, and knowing that the Lord expected more of you, or your dad, in this case, expected more of you, and you didn't perform. As opposed to when, with the grain thing, I did perform. Well, it's it's interesting how there's layers of things like that that build up. I mentioned last time a little baby learning how to walk, that trust that they develop. Yeah, first it's just stand up next to a wall or next to a chair, and then it's crouch down, then it's stand up, and then it's actually take a step, and then it's actually let go with your hands and see if you can still keep balance. And finally, you learn to walk, and then it's like a new world opens up. Have you ever seen a little kid after he learns how to walk? It's like, whoa, he just surprised himself because it was fun after he got through the bumped head stage. Yeah, the part where you fall as often as you walk. But anyway, you get through that, and it's always the preferred way to get around from that time forward. And we use it to our benefit. And it's not any difference with some of these other things that I'm talking about. This seems to apply across all stages of life, I guess is what I'm saying. So then we're back to what I talked about earlier in one of these videos, where you could get down to rock bottom and set a lamp post. Remember that initial podcast I gave, where you could rely on that rock to set your lamp post and light your life and your actions from that point forward, maybe, and hopefully some others. But once you start to realize that, whoa, obedience lights or sets that lamppost for me, and disobedience doesn't. One works, the other one doesn't work. So once you start to rely on that, you realize that then it's just an interesting phenomenon that settles down on you, and you start to say, hey, something's going on here. And that feeling I had, I talked to, it's been several videos, and you don't have to go back that far, but I rescued a calf that I talked about, and in a rainstorm, and had a peaceful feeling after the whole experience was over. If you've listened to it, you understand. But that's another example of this peace that came over me after I'd done my best. I put myself out there. I exerted some energy to a good cause. And then I felt this peace. It's a great feeling. Let me take this to the next level, or the next phase, because I was, I've some of these things I've told you about takes me up through about age 10 or 11 or so when I was doing the grain thing, but it wasn't too many years after that. And my parents, the same brother that I talked about in the not being able to find his shoes in the fire when the barn was burning, he ended up getting married and going into the Air Force. And he was stationed in Waco, Texas. Well, my parents were not traveling people. Let's face it, if you have a herd of cows and they have to be milked twice a day, you don't do a lot of traveling. At least not very far. And so I was a little bit surprised when they said, we've decided we're going to go visit our son. His name's Ellis, and that they were going to go visit him, and he lived in Waco, Texas. Well, that's a long ways away, 1,000 miles from where we lived. And guess what? I had a job to milk the cows while they were gone. And I remember it was in March. And I think it caught them by surprise, because in March, sometimes the weather starts to get better, and they think, well, things are going to be all right. And I don't know what all went into their decision making to go then, but they went in middle of March, third week in March maybe. And I won't go into all the details, but I can tell you that I had a harrowing experience while they were gone, because I was in charge of the cow milking. My little brother would help me. His name was Mark. He would help me with the details of the cow milking, and I had some siblings that looked in and helped as well, and came home from school or whatever to help out. But basically, I was in charge of getting those cows milked. Well, guess what happened? The temperatures dropped to about 40 below zero. Now, and I'm not exaggerating. It went to 40, very close to 40 below zero during that time for a stretch there while they were gone. And they weren't gone that long. But the milkers, I remember the milkers, they have these little valves that go back and forth and create the suction on the milking machines that milk the cows. And it was so cold that they wouldn't work. And so I had to get hot water and in buckets, and between the cows, I'd have to, when they stopped working, I'd have to hurry and put them in cold water, or hot water, and get them to work for a little while longer, and then the water would freeze up, and it was just an awful, awful experience. I can remember my uncle finally got in on it, found out about it, and came and helped us a little bit, but I can remember the panic that I was in. And when I think back on it now, I think, boy, they really had a level of trust in me for them to just take off to Texas and leave me with a herd of cows that had to be milked night and morning. And I'm sure they didn't expect 40 below zero temperatures, but it came. And somehow we got through it. And I can remember thinking after that experience too, and after they came home and they talked about it, saw how, realized what a trial it was and how the cows were all still functional, because if you don't milk the cows, it ruins them. And I had to keep them in the barn because it was so cold outside, it would freeze their teats, and so we kept them in there, and which meant you had to clean the gutters out in the barn with this manure scoop and manure fork, and it was just an ordeal for me. I'd never experienced any kind of stress that met that level in my life, and I don't know for sure how old I would have been, but probably 16 or something like that. 16 years old, and I did the very best I could, and finally, anyway, with a little help and some insights about how to take care of those kind of problems, we got through it without any major problems. But I've thought back since, the trust was there. I don't know that I would have trusted somebody to take care of the livelihood that I had for the farm. That was their livelihood, a big share of it, and they trusted me, and I was humbled, I guess is the word. I was humbled that they would trust me to know how to handle that situation. Well, since that time, I've had other situations and different nature, different ways, but the same principles apply. And this is why I mention it, is because whether it's walking or whether it's planting the field or whether it's doing the calf thing and feeling the good feeling there when you extend yourself and try your best, it all leads into this trust component that is necessary. And I realized it through an earthly father. But like I said, we're really spirits with bodies, not bodies with spirits. And all of that applies to my spiritual upbringing as well. And I've asked myself quite often, and still do to this day, many times even a day, I've had this prompting indicating that the Lord wants me to do something and that he trusts me to do it. The question is, am I going to run to the house when I'm needed, or am I going to stay around and try to perform the best I can and do what I can to help out? When I hear that, when I feel that prompting. Yeah, I'm just looking at the time here, and I don't have time to explain something that happened today even, but it happens regularly. And if you start to pay attention, you're going to find out that in your life it happens regularly too. You start to be aware of what's around you and what the needs are. You'll see some needs and you'll feel some promptings, and they will get to the point where they're more than just a prompt, they're a command. And that's a good thing, because you recognized it for what it is. And then once you recognize it as a command, then it's just a matter of, okay, I know what it is. What am I going to do? And just like the Arabian horse thing we talked about earlier in one of the posts, even when everything else says don't, if you hear that and you do, then you're going to feel that warm feeling that I was talking about. And you'll get to the point too where you'll recognize the opposite of that feeling. You'll get the feeling and you won't, and it'll be gone. You'll never have another chance. And you'll feel the opposite of that. And then you have to do some correction, just like I had to do when I ran to the house and let my dad stay down there trying to milk a cow with a burnt down barn when the cow wouldn't stand still. There was some correcting that had to go on there, and I got corrected, and I was able to go on and do some other things that were really beneficial. And later in my life, that trust level was there. I've tried to build it with my children and my family, my friends and my neighbors. Humanity in general relies on you, or trusts you. They trust you not to drive on the road drunk. They trust you to take care of things. When we were younger, we used to shoot BB guns sometimes. They trust you not to shoot their windows out of their house with a BB gun. And the list goes on and on. You'll see it around you every day. But it's an important thing to develop trust. So, as you can tell, I've kind of wanted to center my comments today about that single word, and hopefully help you, just like it has with me, become part of that bedrock, part of your character that you can use to get you through hard times, whether it's milking cows in 40 below zero weather, or helping to save a calf, or help your dad when he's trying to milk cows, or whatever. Get you through some hard times and help you unify with those around you in such a way that the Lord's going to look at you and say, you did a good job. I'm proud of you today. Keep it up. Just keep it up. There's more ahead. There's still more to learn, but you're making great progress. And when you feel that feeling, you'll know that you're feeling the fruit of what our intent is here in this life, as far as our Heavenly Father is concerned, just like your earthly Father praises you. So hopefully you'll be able to internalize that a little bit. I sometimes go a long way around to get the point across. In fact, I have to share this with you now that I've mentioned it. But we raised our family up in Lake Town, Utah. It's on the south end of Bear Lake, and they had an old saying up there that if you didn't get to the point, or whatever it was, if you did something the hard way, they'd say, "Oh, you went clear around the lake to get to Willis's." Well, first I didn't know what that meant. Then I was told, or found out when I went and looked, as you drove down to the lake, Willis's house was just kind of off to the left on a little stretch of road that was only about 150 yards long. And if you went the opposite way to Willis's, you'd have to drive clear around the lake, which was 20 miles long. So you'd end up going on about a 50-mile trip to get to Willis's, where you could have gotten there in about 150 yards. That's what it means to go the long way around the lake to get to Willis's. And that's kind of what I did here tonight, I think, is I'm trying to make a point about trust and having it be a bedrock of our character. And maybe I went the wrong way. Maybe I went around the lake to get to Willis's, to get to that trust thing. But who knows? Maybe it'll help you remember it better. If not, forgive me and hang in there and keep coming back. I've got more to say. Sometimes I've been accused of saying too much. But there's one thing about these YouTube videos, these posts. If you don't like them, you could just shut them off. If you do, you can turn them back on. And they're hopefully going to be on call for posterity. I hope posterity way down the road. I close my eyes and try to think who it is I'm speaking to. And I see familiar faces, but I don't think very long until I start to think, oh, hold on there. There's people there that I haven't even learned yet. And I don't know how many's coming. Sometimes posterity happens very fast once the old snowball gets turning down the hill, if you know what I mean. So anyway, come back, enjoy some more, or turn it off and enjoy life that way. Either way, still love you. Bye.